G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 6th of January 2026. Did I get it right? I hope I got it right. Welcome friends and fans to episode 6, what is it, 1,000 something now? I've produced over 1,000 videos. You wouldn't know it on YouTube though because screw you, you can get hacked, lose all your videos, there's no backups, no restoration, you can't re-upload. And I don't have actually all of my videos either, thanks to hard drive crash. But if I was going to say I told you so, I'd probably put together, I should have kept track of all my scripts and do a compilation. But these days you can upload all your videos to get them scripted, but not going to do that. I'll just take my word for it. I warned you this was coming for a long time. Zelensky, again, refuses peace. Are you surprised? And are you surprised that Putin responds with missiles aimed at Kiev? Even though we all know Zelensky's in a bunker in Poland. Oh, you didn't know that? Some people are new here, of course, don't know that Zelensky actually is in multiple locations because there's multiple Zelenskys. There's stand-ins, there's use of AI. The man spends most of his time in a studio doing videos in Warsaw, outside of Warsaw in the studios there they use for filming. Don't forget, they made a whole movie set town of Kiev where they filmed Zelensky's TV show outside of Ukraine. Commonly believed it was filmed in Poland in a set, and it's still there. People have noticed the shadows were wrong in many instances in recent videos. I think due to copyright, I tried uploading before to show some videos, they definitely don't like that. But, yeah. You get copyright warnings these days sometimes when you upload. But live stream, nah. I'm going to be very careful what I live stream. Recently showed some videos of some attacks on Ukraine by Russian drones. And, I got a soft warning. And from YouTube, of course, third warning about, over-reliance on third-party videos, your content. You have to have content guidelines aren't very specific. So it's screw YouTube yet again. So maybe tomorrow I might bring you something, if I can find it, that won't trigger copyright to show you, just exactly how the trauma and stress of combat, and that it's totally changed from the just sitting in the trench. Because now you have to worry about things that you don't have to worry about bombs. You have to worry about grenades being dropped by drones. You have to worry about drone wire. You have to worry about falling debris because often, they have these airbursts now, particularly Russia. Lots of airbursts. Though how many of these airburst attacks, nobody really knows, but it's predominantly in the towns anyway. Now, these can range from your 50-pounders all the way up to, what's the biggest? I think the biggest Russian is 3,000 pounds. Of course, America has a 9,000-pound bomb that can literally tunnel into the ground. So, yeah, Russia's not that big a threat. Europe is panicking over a country whose economy is the size of Italy, right, who can't even steamroll Ukraine. It's just that they don't know, they're in a panic, right? They don't know how to exit from this war because I think deep down, nobody knows who's really pro-war or anti-war because they keep switching. That Europe can't make up its mind. They're bitterly divided. I think Trump is niggling them a little too hard, But maybe it's what they need, a bit of tough love, a bit of a slapping around, you know? Bring back the pimp hand. Now, Russia's made some advances on the battlefield, but not much. Slightly westward movement here. Slight attacks probing along the front lines. They conducted probing of the defences in Kupiansk, keeping the Ukrainian death trap operational, because Ukrainian pride. All you have to do is tickle and move a feather, and they'll ape out, and Russia just sits back and laughs while the Ukrainians charge into their machine guns. But that is what it is. Dumb, you can't be cured. You can educate the ignorant, but you can't cure dumb. Now, here we have Russia genuinely stalled, unable to break through, with the fact that they are spread out over so many offensives, but most of them, will eventually break through and make slow advances, though there's still lots to go here. For some reason, they've decided to start heading south here instead of west. Whether or not Lyman was the target might have been a red herring by Putin to get Zelensky to pull all his men here while they finish off this line here. Don't know exactly if they're going to follow this line here or what their intentions are. Putin is not an open book, plays his cards very close to his chest, and goes with the flow of the battlefield. He's like Mercury, you toxic, dangerous, but follows the path of least resistance. And the best way to be enigmatic is don't reveal your cards. That way you can always hold back and say, I always intended to do this, troubles arise, and when trouble arises too high, Mercury flows around, and that's what's happening here. Mercury's flowing around. They're making a few advances here and there. They might just cut the city in half right down this line, and just push this up a bit further and destroy, supply lines, whatever. Basically, I think a lot of this is now pressure to shape the border and to see how much pressure they can apply in Ukraine. Because I think beyond this point, I don't think there's nothing really worth another 100,000 men and 2 years of fighting. Estimates. But don't forget, they all won't die. I mean, they'll only lose 30%, but it's 30% too many, right, brothers? But here, you look at the combat situation here. It is slow, it is a grind, and it is not going anywhere fast. It is, again, the only difference between Putin and Mercury is, at the moment, Putin's moving more like molasses. And like molasses, I think he's pretty much sticks wherever he lands. Although he's been pushed back here and there, the Russians grind back, and though it's slow going, this is still one of two offensives that have remained intact. Meanwhile, Ukraine has traded this little block of land here for all this, right? All of this. Look how far, right? Look at this big knob, okay? This big knob here is because Zelensky decided to sacrifice a few thousand men on the battlefield here instead of holding the line at these rivers and prevented river crossings, which would have stopped Putin's advances. The biggest mistake Zelensky's made is not using the Ukrainian rivers and blocking Putin's crossings, right? Had they blocked, right? They've successfully blocked Putin's crossings before, but had they continued to do so and use all these rivers as defensive barriers, right? And eventually they would have created an interlocking network with a few choke points that they could hold, right? Making sure that nothing could get across, right? And using the HIMARS to make sure nothing gets in range, right? They could sit a mile back from the river, conduct what's called a rear line defense, right? You have your spotters up front, well hidden, well concealed. Even if Putin sees them and starts sending drones, you air defense them. If they try to snipe them, you can counter snipe. You'll lose a few men, but you won't lose a lot. And you'll artillery back and forth, with the defender having the advantage and the high ground, typical military tactic, right? And with the HIMARS, instead of worrying about strikes on Moscow or strikes on the Kursk Bridge or strikes on Zemstopol or anything else, strikes on supply lines, supply depots, ammunition depots, anything within 100 kilometers, well, maybe 20 kilometers of the front line, right? Maybe, limit yourself a little bit, but, weaken Russian air defenses, keep them grind, and a 6 months grind to a halt, Putin's done. Maybe a 12-month grind. And this could have been should have been done in 2022. Right? And that's their biggest mistake, right? They failed to capitalize on the situation at the time. You never give Putin a second bite of the apple, because he pulls out a meat cleaver and just chops it, right? And he just keeps going. Once he starts, he ain't stopping. Like you reach for that apple and he takes your hand off. He doesn't stop. Okay? The only person that can reach in and take that apple now is Donald Trump. Okay? Not Donald Tusk, the puffed up man from Poland. The only thing making Donald Tusk tough is his alliance with Donald Trump, Without Europe. Europe is a man, Europe's a Greek man in a is it called a palatine? Female toga, That's carrying such a liberty torch and blowing it out quietly and saying, the warmth of... you should trade the rugged individuality for the warmth of collectivism. And, of course, everybody remembers how, the Berlin Wall was definitely keeping in that warmth, right? That was all there for the keeping in the warmth. But you see, right, across the battlefield, Russia is dominating. And it's all because they just would not use the few good natural barriers they had, right? Accepted the Minsk Accords, which they promised to do. Zelensky ran on a promise, right? He hasn't kept his word. That's why we haven't got a peace deal. Zelensky can't keep his word. Remember, last December he said, I'm going to implement Donald Trump's peace plan. And then he starts quibbling and then asking for money, And then as he gets money, he starts asking for more. He goes to Washington to talk about the peace deal. When he comes there, he says, I want $50 billion. I want to go to the Holocaust Museum and talk about the situation in Ukraine. And because I want to fundraise. We needed the funds for the rebuilding. And they said, out of here. We don't, we're risking someone coming in and flipping the tables. And that person is Donald Trump, my friends. And he's going to keep flipping those tables. You may not like everything he does, but in this world, you have to accept you do not get your way every day in every way, right? If you cannot accept any loss, any setback, if you cannot sell your ideas, if you cannot push your ideas, if I tell you, right, in order to change the course of anything, most people won't believe me. How simple it is to make videos trend, and you can actually slowly over time, but here's the problem. Most people aren't long-term thinkers, long-term planners, or long-term doers, right? The longest you can get most people's attention now is 5 minutes with football scores. So I'm making these videos for the people who do pay attention and want more than just platitudes. Or I told you so's. There you go. That is what the solution looks like. That's just a baby, right? That's just a Kinzhal, a baby. Like a 59, an older model, smaller missile, fast, and just pretty much just drops like a hammer, right? It's kinetic impact only, right? It just smashes through, just comes straight down like a knife, bang, kinetic impact, boom, there goes the city block. Bit expensive, but air defenses suck at stopping them. Now, imagine if it was 30 times the size, carrying it's a 30, maybe 50 times the size. Yeah, 3,000 tons. You know what force times mass, you know what force is? Mass by acceleration. So you take a much bigger mass, traveling much faster. How many city blocks is a 3,000-pound missile loaded with rocket fuel, right? Gelatin rocket fuel, not your average rocket fuel, right? This is gelatin. This stuff basically is napalm on roids. It hits, the warhead impacts, crushing the nitric acid, which just basically spews up in a superheated plume. Doesn't need to, it chemically reacts with everything it touches. Basically, that fireball is just going to spread subnuclear, but it's still somewhere in the vicinity, right, of how many Newton meters per second, Newton's law or whatever, you got, it's how many times faster than gravity, and then you multiply it out, like squared. So, it is, 3 to 5 miles? It'll destroy, you saw the previous Onsk, right? 1,000 kilograms, around 2,000 pounds, still smaller than the Satan II. It's big, the Onsk is just the little brother, okay? But they have several models. Russia is building up. They're testing each one, right? So if they drop a 3,000 pounds, it's going to be way bigger than the 2,000 kilogram. You saw the 2,000 kilogram, right? Destroyed 4x4 blocks of reinforced concrete. Now, any explosion is going to be absorbed by what it hits. So, Kiev, in the middle of Kiev, it'll probably do a lot more damage than, say, in the middle of Dnipro or any of the other fortified cities. But still, 36 missiles. How many cities has Ukraine got? Well, you only need, 8 cities to go? There goes half their economy. Because the population fleeing fast. Drop one on the center of Kiev. How many people are going to be on the next how many people are going to be racing west as far as they can go? They're not going to wait for the next missile. Okay? As soon as the first missile hits, they're gone. The survivors are gone. They're not coming back. They're not going to say, they're going to start playing guess which city. They're going to evacuate the cities and guess which city gets hit next. They're going to be demanding surrender. Of course, you cannot be sure, right? It's rarely happened in history. But I think we're getting close to that tipping point. Will Ukraine knuckle down or surrender? Putin is not pushing the envelope. He's not testing the theory. Because I think, let's see, in the history of sieges, most fail. Most fail in the history of sieges. So in this siege, of which there are not many modern examples of a siege winning without absolute steamrolling, right? I think there's always a greater possibility that Ukraine will just wait it out. Just watch Putin destroy cities and still thumb their nose. There's probably a greater chance of that, but still, the way it looks right now is the possibility does exist. And while that possibility exists, the liberal establishment's trying to convince the world, right? And this is why Putin is still going, because the more liberals can try to convince him he's wrong, the more he believes he's right, because liberals have been wrong about so many things, right? He does not care, right, that they call him names, call him Stalin, call him Hitler, call his other things. He's looking at the results, and he's seeing the steadiness waver time and time again. Each missile hit has people talking about, giving up land for peace. Now, Zelensky asked for guarantees. There's no guarantees in this world, right? Remember, China didn't come to Zelensky's aid. China sent ammunition and weapons to Russia. North Korea just tested a new missile. How long before that new missile's now in Russia? Now, air defences have been tested for the last 2 days, at least on average twice a day, but Russian air defences have held, despite the fact that Ukraine has shot, probably 40, 90, 130, probably another 41. So, yeah. So, nearly over 150 drones, and they still have not broken the Russian wheel either. But they are losing money at an incredible rate, doing this now twice a day, right? They're just burning through drones. This is burning through the British economy. These drones aren't coming from Ukraine. Now, of course, is the I told you so moment. I told you, Zelensky's arranging the deck chairs and he ain't finished. I said, what about the SBU? Yesterday I think it was yesterday, that they didn't see this coming. They didn't see the gold toilet scandal, or they knew about it and didn't tell anybody. And Zelensky's pretty much treating this like this guy never told him. So rumours abound that, he'll be the sacrificial goat, and it turns out to be correct. Now, he's not the only one. He's gonna name someone as the to go down with him. He'll say, "Oh yes, it's my department. I resign, but this guy here, he should have told me. He should have known. That department head, he's gone too. He'll make sure that the people who fired him hurt just as bad as him. This is." You do not understand how vengeful or how stubborn and how pig-headed this is why so many people don't go to Ukraine for wives, okay? It's the idiots who go, thinking, these women are, they're going to be desperate for men. Yeah. You're a sucker if you go for a Ukrainian bride, I tell you. You're a sucker. There they say, yeah. Well, my brother is fighting. He needs money to escape Ukraine. You're going to hear that story soon. You're going to hear a lot of people talking about how the Ukrainian girls took them for a ride. But right now, the crackdown on TikTok is pretty phenomenal. There's still a lot of censorship. Same with screw YouTube. But, yeah. This is why he's an ex-French military chief of staff, because he told them no to a war, that Ukraine is no longer capable of winning. Didn't I tell you that yesterday? Didn't I tell you the biggest mistakes Europe's made? Russia's advancing. Russia's taken another town. This is probably the third, I think, this week. Most have been small, but it doesn't matter. It's still a poke in the eye to Zelensky. And Zelensky says, we will not give up land. Russia ain't asking, fool. Russia ain't asking. And when Russia's reached its, I forget what the size of the buffer zone is, I saw the speech. It was mostly in Russian. For some reason, it was only bits were translated by the Western media, so France 24. And the thing is, don't ever try to use their clips, right? they'll right turn, Clyde, clock you out. But, they really are upset in France right now. They really want their war, but they're not going to get it. Macron's desperate because the EU needs, right? He needs an enemy, right? Every empire needs an enemy, an existential threat to hold it together, to say, don't worry, the fear porn, I'll keep you safe from the fear porn. I'll keep you safe from the climate change iceberg polar bears that drink of the vodka and say, "Das Vidanya, comrade." It's gonna Cold War fear all over again. But remember the boomers hiding under their beds. The red under the bed. And all the boomer crap. Ain't working on a lot of these young folks or Gen X down onwards, even the millennials, they remember the Cold War and they laugh at how stupid some of the stuff the boomers came up with when, Reagan was talking about, they had, post-Reagan, you found out during the Bush era that Russia didn't even have half the teeth that Reagan was claiming they had, It's why he was able to go up there so confidently and knowing that at the time Russia didn't have the fuel to go to war to defend Eastern Europe. They'd exhausted already so much resources on Vietnam and later on air defense missiles. For the Cold War, they were panicking. All their rocket tests. They used up a lot of fuel with Sputnik and programs, particularly sending rockets to the moon, trying to get their own landing going, and eventually burnt out. They were, after 3 tests of their space shuttle, they had to dock that and let it rot, and watch as the Americans took and ran with it, and put them to shame. And Russia never really recovered from that. They were leading at one stage in space, but they overexerted themselves with Afghanistan, Chechnya, and many other smaller economic disasters, particularly propping up China, which, too much to their regret, and unfortunately, for every weapon system they sold to China, all they got back was grain or often their own products, scrap, they'd pay in, send them old tanks as scrap, and Russia didn't have the means or the materials to, so like they got all these tanks lined up, but how many are scrap? Nobody knows for certain. But they are slowly upgrading and slowly trying to rebuild their economy. And it's mostly, as Putin says, and he has constraints. He's more constrained now in his, 5th term than he was in his previous terms. Particularly his first term, he had a lot more power, But then, during his first term, when he was appeasing the West and disarming Russia, everybody loved him. But as soon as he stopped, ooh, you're the boogeyman, Because again, this is all about feeling powerful, and people like Keir Starmer can't sleep at night unless they feel powerful. They can't get it up unless they feel powerful. They in love with their own reflection, and of course, this is why they collectively bully Russia, only because they've got America to run behind. Because if they didn't, maybe Russia and China would think they have a chance. If the European Union crumbled, which it eventually will, every empire crumbles, right? This is why they hope Russia will collapse, but it won't, because it's not an empire, it's a country. Even if, it's had a few loose cannons leave, and what they're doing is trying to chip away, but, right now, so many people go, well, if we get alone, America will, Europe will just swallow us up. We'll end up like Estonia or Latvia or Poland, Or maybe some will think, oh, well, if we end up like Poland, that's not too bad. And then they realize that, what's it like to be Polish? well, nobody likes us and they want to use us as the front line and the battering ram against Russia. And when the war's over, they hope that Russia will destroy us so that their economies will pick up. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. People are that naive to realise how despicable politics really is. I guess that's why so many people don't like put their head to the sand and bury it in sports. Folks, war ain't a sport. It's not about keeping score. War doesn't decide who's the strongest. It's not survival of the fittest. It only decides who's left. And you know who's left? Usually the rejects who hid in the bunkers. The men who stayed at home and screwed the women while you went out and died. And that's what they want. That's why these weak people want war. Because they don't go. They don't get sent to war. The weak don't get sent to war. The academics stay home and get to fool around with all the broads. That's why they want war. Because all they think about is themselves. So you got to start doing it, man. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, which you'll find in the description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a nice day, and see you in the next video. Bye for now.